Auction failures. That's the topic on Rethink Real Estate today. Hopefully you enjoy. Welcome to Rethink Real Estate. My name is Ben Brady, and this is a real estate podcast aimed to deliver sales strategies, marketing tips, and business insights from industry experts and myself to build a listing-focused business for the future. Let's get into it. Hopefully this isn't clickbait because we're going through auction failures today. And it starts off with the perception of failure. I think that that's one of the most important parts here is there a failure when it comes to auction? Because it's a word that absolutely gets expressed to us in many, many different ways. I think that there's an element that we are the scapegoat. There's no question about that. And that's okay. It just really bothers me when there's no reflection on ultimately people's self. You know, one of the interesting parts that I experienced with a property in Vegas recently where the bidding to start from was $1.4 million. The seller's expectations was around 1.8. It had been on the marketplace for 5 months in total. It had 3 price reductions from 1.9 down to 1.8. It took 3 price reductions just to come down that $100,000. We did a bidding to start from at $1.4 million, had 30 odd people through the front door of the property. We had one offer at $1.4 million and that was it. The agent explained it to me as a failure. And see, again, obviously, and I'd love to hear comments about this. I'd love people to message. I'd love people to comment below about it. But obviously my responsibility is to defend our process. And maybe I'm defending it blindly and I'm happy to be proven wrong here. But in my eyes, that isn't a failure because it's given an identification very quickly in that marketplace that 1.4 is all that ultimately we could get. From the market that is surrounding that property immediately, looking at it, from exposing it to different marketplaces and different people that might not have looked at it previously. If it was worth that $1.8 million $1.8 million price, that buyer would have already seen it. That buyer would have already gone and made that offer. Now, we've provoked the marketplace a little bit for people that needed a bit of a kick in the ass, for lack of better terminology. Some other people that might not have been able to afford Henderson in Vegas and might have been coming from other areas and hoping that they could get it for another price. But being able to use that $1.4 million then to say that we have another offer on the property prior to auction, that social validation that creates is great. But if we can't leverage that, then that gives me a very clear understanding as a seller that, hey, my property isn't worth that much right now. I'm going through a realization of one of our own properties. We've got a flip going on in Reno at the moment. It's going through the auction process. Bidding to start from is $380,000. Our break-even number on the property is $430,000. I've only had 3 offers, $380,000 and $390,000. So what we're doing is we're taking it off the market. We're going to rent the property out, okay? And at the end of the day, the other thing that we're going to do whilst we're renting it out, we're going to put it back on the marketplace at $429,000 to just give us some further clarity that within a week or two after auction that definitely isn't out there whilst we try and rent the property out. But we've been able to make a decision within 30 days of that property being on the market so that we don't waste our time and continuing to burn more and more and more of our end result and our money. And I find that invaluable, whereas an agent will use us as a scapegoat and being one of the other things is that, again, this comment that was made, and again, it was Tamara is the agent on, very lovely lady. Like, again, she recommends us. She gave us a referral to another agent in her office. Like, great, but it was funny for her to turn around and go, look, I just don't think the area is, ready for auction. Now, we've done many auctions in Henderson previously that she didn't see. I just don't think. I think it's the process. I'm like, Tamara, I'm going to say this because we've got a decent enough relationship, but maybe traditional isn't ready for, maybe that area isn't ready for traditional real estate. What do you mean? Well, you didn't sell it for 5 months, I believe. So does that mean traditional isn't working? Well, I think it's just a lapse in the market. But it was funny, like then it went to the market, then it went to the property, then it went to the seller. But it was amazing to see that us be scapegoated first. I think it's just the auction process, Ben. People aren't used to it here. Amazing to see that scapegoat. Again, then when we were talking to the sellers, exactly the same reasoning. I just don't think the market's not used to it here. Okay, and additionally, you were on the market for 5 months traditionally. So let's go back and talk further about failures as well. Like another definition of a failure is that a property goes through the auction process. We don't sell it before on the day of auction. It is then priced traditionally after and then sells. Now, selling within a short period of time, that's great. But a couple of examples that come to mind here. Here's one of them. Okay, this is a property at South Pine Street in Orange. This is a property with Paolo and Wesley, who are the listing agents on this property. Property sold I think I mentioned in one of my auction wrap-ups, property sold for $985,000. Bidding to start from was $875,000. We took it to live auction. We got to $985,000 as the highest bid on the day of auction. And the seller said no, they wanted $1 million. So they went back out and they put a traditional price on the property of $1,025,000, I think it was, or $1,050,000, something along those lines. Sat on the marketplace for a week, didn't get anything further. That buyer still hung around. Sat on the market for another week, didn't do anything further with the price. Buyer hung around. Ended up accepting that buyer's offer of $985,000. Is that auction a failure because it didn't sell before on the day of auction? No, it was simply about process of elimination. Even though that seller had been on the marketplace traditionally previously, they still needed to go through that yet again. They used auction as another layer of an excuse. And auction can be dangerous sometimes as another layer of excuse. Here's another property, an example. Sold after auction. This is Karen's property at 1050 Lucky Avenue there in Menlo Park. That property sold after auction with a traditional price on the property, bidding to start from $380,000, sold for $4,050,000. Now, that sold about 3 weeks after the auction because the original list price on that property when it was on the marketplace traditionally before the property being rented was $4.9 million. The seller then priced the property at $4.2 million after the auction. If you ask me, that's an astounding success. Property sold for $4,050,000. Now, keep in mind, we've done a great deal of properties in Lucky Avenue, and this property here had some issues with it. Obviously, dumpster at the back of the property. Some of you have heard me speak about it before. It just, there was a church at the back of the property, and they had their dumpster at the back of it. It just wasn't good. The ADU that it had in the backyard was nowhere near as valuable as a bigger main property, and just had its issues. It was just one of those properties that just wasn't suitable to absolutely everybody. But that being said, is that I think that's an astounding result. Now, again, the seller probably doesn't see it as a success, and maybe Karen doesn't either. Karen's done a lot of auctions with us. She understands that process. But actually, now reflecting on it, no, Karen was not a big fan of this. Was the first one she'd ever sold after auction. Everything else had sold prior to auction. And I remember her saying, I just never had a circumstance like this. It's like, Karen, it's working amazingly. Took him from 4.8 to 4.2. It's pretty good, wouldn't you say? Oh, yeah, but I've never had an auction fail before. Again, it's the definition of failure, and your definition of failure is so much different than it comes to mine. And again, happy to be proven wrong here, folks, but happy to argue this until I'm blue in the face, because that's one of those things. Another property that had in Oregon, Happy Valley, Jennifer Maben, one of our key stars up there, and one of our key business owners, is that Crescent Ridge Loop in Happy Valley, bidding to start from on the property was $899,000 and sold for $1,011,000 after auction. This was a situation where we had a couple of offers prior to auction. We had a few people lingering around, and they just didn't take action prior to the auction date. It wasn't a big enough draw point, wasn't big enough leverage. I don't know what it was when it came to this property. But then we put the property back on the marketplace. The sellers were going to take the property off the market and just, move back into it and just leave it, and just didn't want to go back through it again because it had been traditional. It had fallen out in escrow. We then took it through to auction. We couldn't sell it at auction. So therefore they just just take it out. I'm like, hey, why don't we let's just put it on the marketplace at $999 for a period of time. They're like, Ben, that is absolute lowest that we will ever go. I'm like, guys, we'll put in the remarks that the price has already been negotiated. Please don't offer under the list price. Anyway, got $1,011,000 for it. Jennifer did within 2 weeks after auction. Now, that being said, there was 2 buyers that had already seen a pre-auction that then put those offers in, and then a third offer came in. We had 3 offers in total. Astounding success, if you ask me, from the auction perspective, because when it turned up, the seller greatly appreciated it even further because of the extent of time that we had to go through in order to do it. There's a couple of others here as well, guys. Whistler Mountain Road in Delray Beach that was sold after auction, bidding to start from at $1 million, sold it for $1,150,000. And again, the seller had told us that they would never accept anything lower than $1,250,000. Take it off the market. We put it back on the marketplace at $1,250,000. We got $1,150,000. That is, again, that's after auction of just going through the process of doing it. It was a different buyer, someone else that saw it at a different time, but the seller really appreciated the offer when it turned up and they accepted it. Another property in Riverside, Oak Park Drive, that was with Grand. This one was an interesting one, sold for $1,157,000. Okay. Bidding to start from was at $1 million. We had an auction. We got them $1.2 million. They said no to it. They had to go through the process of elimination and putting it on the marketplace after at $1,250,000 and then coming back and selling it for $1,157,000 after the fact for a greater appreciation. That is an astounding success because they actually grabbed it with two hands when they would have never considered that previously. Again, guys, I may be spinning things because I'm trying to find the silver lining in all of this. But after auction, getting it priced effectively, getting your sellers more appreciative of the marketplace when it does turn up. You, as an agent, who many of you have delusions of grandeur of what a property is worth. I had someone argue even the other day about a property in Arizona. It's got to be worth that. I vehemently disagree because we've had 40 groups of people through the door and every single person has never placed an offer even at the bidding to start from price at $1.2 million when the sellers want $2 million. I disagree entirely. And again, that's right now in today's market. It's not worth that. But anyway, I just wanted to make sure that we spoke about the failures, quote unquote, because the perception of a failure is always different in each individual person's eyes. And maybe I've got to do a better job at looking at it from another person's perspective. But the scapegoating when it comes to the process of us is unbelievable. The word failure gets thrown around so quickly when ultimately it's probably the only reason that these properties have ended up selling is taking it through that process. So anyway, my definition of a failure is very different to others. My definition of a failure is when a seller comes to marketplace and they go through the auction process and their expectations are $1.1 million, which is too high. Say that property is worth $900,000. Say someone starts off with their reserve price at $1.1 million. We go through 4 weeks of auction and then they price their property at $1,050,000 or $1,090,000 or $1,999,000 or 1.1 again. That is a failure when we haven't done our appropriate job to display the marketplace to your seller and shift expectations. Because I'll leave you with this. Let's say that property really is worth 1.1. And let's say you educate your seller to accept $900,000. Does it stop them from accepting 1.1 when it eventually turns up? No. No, it doesn't. It just makes them appreciate it far more from the effort that you've taken them through. Thanks, team. So about 75% of our audience hasn't liked, followed, or subscribed to our podcast. It would mean the world to us, and it would help this podcast more than you know to expand our reach if you were to like, follow, or subscribe on any of the platforms that you're watching or listening on. Thanks again.